It's just to check if were awake, Ricardo. So it's session 2, 11 a.m. and the session is on policy processes and structural changes in Eurasia. As far as I'm aware, just checking the participants, we only have 2 speakers, unless Professor Seam or Professor Tatkalo are in the audience. I don't see them, but if you join us, that would be great. But if you're happy enough, Iftikhar, we'll start off with your paper, Towards Better Theories of the Policy Process, a review of the applications of Advocacy Coalition Framework. Yes, over to you, Iftikhar. I think the pace will be a little bit more relaxed than the first session. We have fewer papers.
Thank you, Professor Knox. A very warm welcome again to everyone. And I will go very fast. And the impetus for this work is that first, let me acknowledge the support that I received from my research assistants, Anara and Victoria. They were very helpful. And the impetus was that since I am teaching public policy for last almost 10 years, and there is quite a environment of frustration among colleagues and students that we don't have nice graphs and equations like Peter Howie and our economists have in terms of theory. So it becomes a bit confusing for our students as well as for colleagues, and there has been some effort to develop a theory. So Advocacy Coalition Framework is probably the most advanced of frameworks to analyze policy, and the primary research question in policy studies is determinants of policy change. How do policies change and how they do not do change? So I wanted to see whether this Advocacy Coalition Framework has really advanced our understanding or not. So I conducted a systematic review. My outline is that first I will briefly explain what Advocacy Coalition Framework is and its review of its applications, main issues in its application, and moving forward with some suggestions. So the ACF was proposed by Paul S. Wattier. He was working in environmental policy in 1987. He wrote an article because at that time, most of the scholarship was focused on external events to the policy subsystem. And policy subsystem is a closed network of actors gathered around a paradigm or ideology, and they have some resources and institutional backup. So that's the concept of policy subsystem, a small group of people monopolizing the policy making. It was further improved by Jenkins, Smith, and Wiebel, but the main idea remained the same. They brought the exogenous policy change variable perturbations outside the system into policy learning. So policy learning became the fundamental driver of policy change in their framework. The recent review that I looked at was 2017 by Wellstead, 737 peer-reviewed articles, which means it's one of the leading frameworks to analyze policy. However, I found its application quite problematic. The framework basically relies on 3 things. One, policy subsystem concept that I already explained. It argues that within a policy subsystem, you can always identify 2 competing coalitions working around different paradigms. So their paradigms become another core component of the framework. So researchers need to identify what is the core paradigm of these 2 coalitions. And then they need to identify those actors, their belief system. And the belief systems, according to Sabatier's argument, change over time. So the minimum time period is 5 to 10 years or 15 years, roughly speaking, other than external events. In that concept of things, they continue to employ a complicated concept, confusing concept, which is policy subsystem. Scholars already had problem in identifying the core boundaries of a policy subsystem. Who are the actors? What is the inclusion criteria? What is the exclusion criteria? And they introduced further 2 concepts, which was coalitions, and identifying coalitions become another problematic area for application of this framework. What is the inclusion criteria? What is the exclusion criteria to be member of the coalition? Coalitions are formed around core beliefs. Identifying those core beliefs become another problematic area for researchers applying this framework. And policy learning contributes to update beliefs, which mean demonstrating for a researcher, demonstrating that learning has occurred remains another problematic area for this framework. So I conducted the review. I found, I searched SSCI database. I did not want 700 articles or 600 articles. So I reserved myself to SSCI database. ACF or Advocacy Coalition keywords brought 137 articles. The articles that explicitly used ACF for empirical research, they were 43. Mainly from North America and Europe, legislative such, area, issue area, environment, agriculture, forestation, and some trade policies as well. So this is the overall data set that I am analyzing qualitatively. The analysis is structured around three key questions. Is the dependent variable policy change precisely and explicitly defined? Are the two core elements of ACF, subsystem and coalitions, and their resources appropriately identified? Do researchers identify and demonstrate causal mechanisms appropriately? These are the three main questions around which this review is structured. What we found here is a majority of articles fail to define as to what constitutes policy change. As per going by the standard Hall classification of policy change can be in degree, policy change can be in tool, policy instrument is changing, or policy change can be in objective. And roughly speaking, the implications of this classification are very pertinent to the question of this framework, because if your core beliefs are changing, going by the traditional learning theory, your causal beliefs are more likely to change if it is a change in degree. If it is a change in policy instrument, then your secondary beliefs need to be updated. And if it is a change in objective, then your core beliefs need to be updated. So this remains a fuzzy area in application of this framework. Then majority of the articles are focused in identifying coalitions' core beliefs at any given point in time. So they do not design research which takes into account 10 years, which Sabathia originally said we need to track the core beliefs over a period of 10 years. So they try to identify, asking survey questions or interview question, core belief of the coalition, and that is how they distinguish coalitions. Nevertheless, they fail to demonstrate learning because of a lack of historical view. Very few articles pay attention to coalitions' resources and coordination mechanism. That is the biggest weakness that I find. How do these coalitions organize their resources and their coordination mechanisms, which should be the key element, but just identifying core beliefs is not sufficient in my opinion. A pre and post research design, so some suggestions. Identification of distinct coalitions remains problematic and suffers from same boundary problems as policy subsystem. A pre and post research design is essential to demonstrate learning. Cross-sectional design is not sufficient for the application of this framework. Researchers need to pay greater attention to identify coalition resources and their coordination mechanisms, because the main criticism on ACF was the collective action problem. As per Mancur-Olson's theory, if there is a free rider problem, why would people contribute their resources, their time to bring about a policy change while they know other people are working on achieving their belief system, their preferred policies. So these are some of my concluding remarks from the application of 43 of these articles of ACF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iftikhar. I think we have time maybe to take questions between papers in this session, so that rather than lose the substance of a paper. So maybe we'll open it up, if that's okay, Iftikhar, for some questions. Sure. for your paper.
Yes.
So over to the audience for questions to Dr. Lodhi. Peter,
yes,
please.
Peter, please.
Obviously, I'm not an expert on ACF, but I do a little bit of stakeholder analysis in some of my courses. But one of the things I've noticed in stakeholder analysis is that some of the members of the coalition switch sides. And I don't see this anywhere. So does a lot of the ACF assume that there's constant coalitions? There's just homogeneous coalitions?
Yes, the framework assumes that, but the issue that you are raising, and this is also a weak point of the coalition, as you rightly pointed out, some members switch sides. And that is why the problem of drawing a boundary around either a subsystem or a coalition is very critical. And when the core way of identifying a coalition is based on their core belief by asking survey questions or interview questions, what they are doing is basically taking a cross section of, let's say, 100 people and identifying how many of them have diametrically opposed views, and then they assume that these coalitions have been there for some time. So this switching of coalition, it never becomes an explicit point of discussion in any of the articles that I have gone through.
Okay.
So maybe I could jump in and abuse my position as chair, Iftikhar, if I may. So in your systematic review of the literature, I wonder if you were able to establish any articles which definitively claim policy change, and as a consequence to be able to see what difference there was in the coalition and core beliefs of those coalitions which led to that.
Yes, there were quite a few articles, although they could not convince me, but at least that was their claim, that because of the core belief has changed over time, though their research design is not historical, it is not pre and post, but they ask certain questions during their interviews and surveys, like what were your earlier beliefs? Why was the previous policy preferred? And why now the new policy has been preferred? So the reasoning given by the interviewees or survey respondents, from that reasoning, they infer that there was a change in belief system. But most of these articles, I think none of them was based on objective change. So the change was, let's say, for example, regulation on deforestation. How many trees you need to plant and how many years you need to wait. If I remember vividly, one article from Netherlands. So the empirical evidence suggests the tree growth rates are different from what previously assumed. So the legislation changed that you cannot cut before 30 years or before 20 years. And that was the result of empirical evidence presented to the policy subsystem. And there were 3-4 such articles. But at the end of the day, I would like to see more of such switches when it comes to switch in policy instrument. For example, a policy subsystem is switching from, let's say, regulation or treasury to information, regulation to treasury or treasury to information. So a move more from centrally controlled direct provision, more towards liberal or contracting out or something like that. Similarly, the more important would be when the objectives change, for example, about mother's welfare or unemployment benefit. That would be really critical, and unfortunately, I did not find a single article, which was actually the starting point for Hall's research, Peter Hall's research. He was looking at the objective change in Thatcher era. So the objectives change, the state and society balance shifted.
May I just ask one quick follow-up question? What constitutes a coalition?
Yeah, that was my research question. So according to Paul Sabatier, a coalition can be identified around core belief systems. And they divide belief system in 3 systems: core belief system, secondary belief system, and causal belief system. So causal belief systems is when you are presented with some evidence, you are more amenable to upgrade your belief. The secondary policy belief systems are where you have certain preferences or you have an ideology about state-society relationship. And that is not amenable to immediate change, no matter what kind of evidence. That takes time. It often requires external events to force coalition members. Finally, it was the core belief, which was the underlying way to identify a coalition. But in all these studies, identifying, and that is my biggest criticism in this paper, identifying a coalition may not be done appropriately until researchers pay attention to their coordination mechanisms, some kind of active participation, some kind of, you remember 2-3 days ago, we were having a presentation from American civil society participation. Yeah. So unless researchers pay attention to participation mechanisms and they try to address this criticism of collective action problem in coalitions, we may not be able to identify coalitions appropriately, because anyone in the population supporting one policy can be a coalition member.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Any additional questions for Professor Lodhi? If not, thank you very much, Iftikhar, for a very interesting presentation. I think I'll move, Professor Tatkalo is here. So if you're okay, Peter, we'll take Professor Tatkalo first of all, who's going to talk to us about constitutional changes as a way of political communication in the context of unconsolidated democracy in Kyrgyzstan. So over to you, Tatkalo.
Yes, thank you. I am going to talk about constitutional changes in Kyrgyzstan. Since 2005, we have three violent changes of power in 2005, 2010, and 2020, but still we have some attempts to create some new version of constitution, and but still we don't have any breakthrough in democracy building. It can be traced by the fact that, according to Freedom House, we are not now are not classified like a free country. Now we are classified as a not free country. Bertelsmann Transformation Index also said that now we are a defective democracy, and the aim of my paper was to understand how that we can consider our constitutional changes like act of political communication between political actors in power and political actors in opposition and the population. So conceptually, I used my I used the concept of mass communication by Harold Laswell, and according to him, we can understand the political communication using the formula who says what to via to whom via which channel and with which effect. And so I assume that constitution can be considered like the main message of our political actors to the political actors in opposition and population. But regarding the political channels of this communication, I assume that the main channel of communication between political actors in power and political actors in opposition is informal politics, and between political actors in power and population is populistic rhetoric. And so
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Tatkalo. Do you have slides that you're sharing with us, or?
Oh, yes, maybe.
It's not essential, but if you have, we don't see them.
Okay, I will try to. No, I have some.
If you're comfortable without them, that is fine. Please carry on. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but some technical problems.
Sure, no problem.
And regarding my theoretical framework, I used the theory by Charles Tilly regarding the democracy. He defines democracy like a broad, equal, protected, and mutually binding consultation between states and the population. And so, basing on this, I assume that the political regime in Kyrgyzstan is not consolidated democracy due to the fact that there are three main problems. The first one is that the party, now our political parties are commercialized. That means that we don't have any political programs, and we don't have any. And nowadays there is a shift from the solidarity basing on traditional society to the bribes of the electorate. For example, when political actors just come to the population and buy their votes, and then the second problem of the democracy building in Kyrgyzstan that there is lack of autonomy of state agencies and limited access orders are building within these state agencies. It means that they are blocked for other people to be involved there, and they are blocked for any innovations, and so they are used by public officers just to make profits out of the public of their posts in the state agencies. And then the third problem is that we have a problem with the state capacity of our state institutions. So there is the violation of the principle of mutually binding states and citizens consultation. So the government couldn't provide any high-level services to the population. That's why that's why population are very disappointed with the ability of the state to meet their needs and their interests. And so, basing on this. On the fact that there is that the political regime of Kyrgyzstan can be considered like an unconsolidated democracy, I provided meta-analysis of the process of adoption of new versions of constitution in Kyrgyzstan. And so in 2006 and 2007, and then in 2010 and in 2020, 2021, because there was at the end of the 2020, when we have this third violent change of power in Kyrgyzstan, and so we have this new version of constitution in 2021. And if we look at this process of constitutional changes, we can see that there were a lot of violations of the legislation during the adoption of this constitution. For example, in 2006, the ex-president of Kyrgyzstan, Kurmanbek Bakiyev, just dragged the process of adoption of constitution, and so there were a lot of mass protests on the streets regarding this problem, and then two versions of constitution that were elaborated by the parliament, and which assumed that the role of parliament will be increased. They were annulled by the constitutional court, and then in 2007 we have the parliament adopted the new version of during the referendum. The new version of constitution was adopted, but still before this new version of constitution was published in our official state newspaper, and the ex-president of Kyrgyzstan just dissolved the parliament, and so the new pre-term elections of the parliament elections were set, and the pro-president political party called Tatkalo won this parliamentary election. So he created this basis for securing his position even within this new version of constitution. And then in 2010, the problem was that there were not any signatures of any members of the interim government in Kyrgyzstan under this new project of constitution. And then so we have this scandal in 2016 that we don't have any credible version of constitution of 2010, and that's why we have this new referendum on constitution 2016. And then in 2020, 2021, we have violations of the process of adoption of this constitution that manifested in the fact that first the new version, this version of constitution was adopted by the bill on the referendum for this new version of constitution were adopted by the parliament with prolonged mandates, and then there were not any the regulations of the parliamentary hearings also were violated by the deputies of Jogor Kukedesh, and so it can be concluded that the process of adoption of new versions of constitution were always in the circumstances of violation of the legislation of the Kyrgyz Republic, both in after three violent changes of power in Kyrgyzstan. And then regarding the communication between the political actors in power and the population, can be said that it is based on populistic rhetoric. First of all, when I provided discourse analysis of their speeches prior to the constitutional reforms, they usually say about the fact that constitution is very crucial from the standpoint of democracy building and from the standpoint of independence, so that the people can understand that it is not just a piece of paper and that any changes are based on crucial changes in the are based on the crucial changes in the environment, and so and on the one hand, and on the other hand, that it is necessary for their it is necessary for them, for their needs, and to satisfy their interests. And besides that, the other thing that I found out during my discourse analysis, that three presidents, Mr. Bakiyev, Atambayev, and Sadir Japarov, they make accent on different things. For example, Atambayev made Kurmanbek Bakiyev made accent on the fact that it is necessary to have some consensus between political centers of political power in Kyrgyzstan, due to the fact that there were some protests on the streets because of his direct process of adoption of constitution. And then Atambayev made his assent on the necessity to construct our parliamentary system, and then Sadir Japarov made assent on national values, just to the due to the fact that not parliamentary nor presidential form of government were not successful in Kyrgyzstan, and so the main source of communication was just this new traditional or national values, and that's why he made accent on them. And so it can be considered that the main effect of this communication, that we have short-term political stability, and then we have political turbulence once more and more, just because these constitutional changes do not active. And
I'm sorry, we lost you there for a couple of minutes there. Could you just backtrack for a couple of minutes?
Okay. So regarding my concluding remarks, I can say that we don't have these changes of constitution are not the tool of establishment democracy in Kyrgyzstan or establishment stability in Kyrgyzstan, because on the one hand they don't solve the problem of capability of state agencies in Kyrgyzstan, because the people are unsatisfied with the quality of state services, and then they just they don't solve the problem of limited access orders within the state institutions. So we have the same people at the same positions, and they don't have any ambitions to solve the problem from the standpoint of capability of state. And that's, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Tatkalo. So let me open it up to the floor for questions, please.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I have a question to our last lecturer. She several times mentioned about state services, public services. And I want to ask her, what kind of services government have to provide, and how? Do you have certain concept or your proposals? Thanks.
Yes, when I was writing my report, I was I read some articles, and one of them was by Nazarbayev, and she provides some example of this unsatisfaction of the population of the state services. She wrote about the Aksakhal ports in Talas region, and she says that the population of this region are not satisfied with these state ports because they are corrupted and there are a lot of bribes and so on. And so they address these Aksakhal ports. So they, and also she says that people are not satisfied with the information they got from the state agencies. They want to just bureaucratic barriers, and for example, if they want to build a school, or if they want to build a house, they need to go to get a lot of this a lot of documents in order to do it, and so they cannot do some things regarding their family lives or just simple life of people. They cannot do it very quickly, and that's why they are unsatisfied with these services, as well as she says regarding the education, that people are unsatisfied with corruption within this with schools, with high schools, and also with the quality of medical services as well. And so I mean that the state services, this on the this regarding this court proceedings, as well as some medical services, education services, and of course some issues of documents by state agencies regarding the regulation of ordinary life of ordinary people.
Thank you. Professor Sharipova.
Thank you, Colin. So Nadezhda, I have a question. How can you explain Zhaparov's success to change the constitution and increase the powers of the president? I mean, how is Zhaparov different from his predecessors, from previous presidents? How would you just characterize him? And also, second point, we know that in Kyrgyzstan, civil society is much more developed than in other countries of Central Asia. So what was the role of civil society in this process of the adoption of the constitution? I mean, why wasn't civil society active and did not preclude from the adoption of this new constitution, amendments to the constitution or new constitution? Thank you.
Regarding the characteristics of Sadr Japarov, I consider that the main factor was that he was a prisoner, and so he was like a victim of political regime, and that's why the people were very influenced by this fact. And another point is that he used some social media resources, and so through this he mobilized the population. And it was a new, if we take into consideration our previous two violent changes of power, this using of mass media was really a new factor. And then regarding our civil society, so we have in 2020 we have the first version of constitution, and there were a lot of power were attributed to the president. There were a lot of accent made on traditional values, on Kurultai, that Kurultai should be like an alternative to the Jogorkhukinesh, and like Jogorkhukinesh was inefficient state agency. And after this first version of constitution, a lot of public protests were on the streets in this constitution, and so the point regarding Kurultai has been reduced. So Kurultai is just can be convened just for some force majeure situations, and that's it. But the main state agency is parliament, and but that's it. And the most, but still the powers of the president is still very broad, according to the new version of constitution. So the civil society can be in Kyrgyzstan is active and can influence the political situation, but still it is not so so influensive from the standpoint of preventing of adoption of some new version of constitution that are not that doesn't meet their interests or needs. So and one point also regarding the civil society, I can say that it is not based on some non-governmental organizations. Usually when we have these violent changes of power, they are based on some mobs, and that's it. So they are not organized in some organizations. They just they are called just because they are relatives or because they are acquainted with each other, and that's why they go to the our square and we have this group once more and more. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Janibek?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to comment on this civil society, just not the question, but the more comment. So what I noticed, I mean, last year during October, this kind of events, I mean, Dina mentioned the civil society, right? I mean, if we mean the civil society in a traditional sense, maybe the Western-oriented, democracy-oriented, human rights-oriented civil society, maybe their power, influence is limited, as you mentioned, right? But on the other hand, we also observed, I guess, a kind of civil society which is on the opposite side, right? I mean, Japarov and his team was tremendously successful in mobilizing all these kind of non-Western oriented, let's say, more traditional kind of following the tradition of Kyrgyz and others. I mean, I think I haven't seen anything previously in this, I mean, in Kyrgyzstan or in other post-Soviet countries. In that sense, I guess we can talk here about two different kinds of civil societies. Maybe one that we accept as kind of democracy-oriented, or more inclusive. The second one being more exclusive and more traditional values-oriented, or this kind of things. And then their role was tremendous. I mean, in October 7th, between 10th, a lot of different organizations, grassroots kind of groups, and civil society in that sense, maybe. So we can also categorize them as civil society. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just ask a quick question, and that is, we often hear Kyrgyzstan described as an island of democracy. in light of what you've just said about constitutional change, and I think the most recent constitution, if I'm not incorrect, was only adopted by about 30% of the was only endorsed by about 30% of the population. So is Kyrgyzstan's title of an island of democracy a misnomer?
Yes, nowadays Kyrgyzstan is not an island of democracy. So I consider that it is not correct to understand democracy just from the standpoint of that we can say whatever we want, whatever we think, and that's it. No, democracy is based first of all on the rule of law, and this rule of law in Kyrgyzstan we don't have nowadays. Because it was said by Farid Zakari about a liberal democracy. So first of all, we need some rule of law, and on the basis of this rule of law, we can base our democracy. And so he provided this historical overview of creation of democracy in, for example, in England. Then we have this parliament in the 13th century, but still we don't have democracy. So I consider that in Kyrgyzstan we don't have democracy. We can be considered like unconsolidated democracy, but no, we don't have this legislation.
Right. Any final questions for Professor Tatkalo? Ricardo, please.
This is a very curious statement, because the piece by Zakaria was distinguishing the different formal democracies or from liberal democracies, and there's a point to be made about the fact that a liberal democracy needs to have rule of law, but a basic democracy just needs to ensure, elections on a regular and relatively fair basis. But my question to you is on a different point. Can you give us some examples of the fact that to support your claim that there is no rule of law in your country or in Kyrgyzstan? Thank you.
Yes, for example, when I talked about the process of adoption of the constitution, for example, if we take this last process of adoption of constitution, first of all, we have this the bill on the referendum of constitution was adopted by the parliamentaries with the prolonged mandate. So they were illegal and they were illegitimate, and that's why it was the violation of the law. The second point is that there were the violations of regulations of the readings of this bill and the new text of constitution and the discussion of the new version of constitution in the parliament. So we have this the period of 10 days between the two readings in the parliament, but we have only 2 days between them, and then there were not any quorums while discussing this new version of constitution in fractions and committees of the parliament. But still we have adopted, but still the parliament adopted the bill on the referendum and the bill on new version of constitution, and so the population voted for it. So even during the adoption of constitution, we have the violations of legislation of Kyrgyzstan.
What about the courts? Sorry to follow up, because when we speak, this is a topic that is really interesting for me. And when we talk about the rule of law, we mean different things. One is, as you were saying in response to my question, how the law is made. Is there due process? And you give us an example for the constitutional reforms in which the due process was not respected. So in that respect, there is no or not much rule of law. But the other sense of the rule of law has to do with the way in which the courts do their job and in which the law is actually administered and applied to people. And so would you be able to comment about whether the courts are actually impartial and equitable and apply the law equally to all citizens, or even that is a problem in Kyrgyzstan?
Yes, for example, also if we take this, our last change of power, for example, our new president, Nadezhda, he was a prisoner, and after he was freed from this from prison, the court take a decision that now there were not any crimes on behalf of him, and so he is just he can nominate himself for the post of the president of the Kyrgyz Republic. But still, other people who were also released from the from prisons, the former Prime Minister Sapar Isakov and the former mayor of Bishkek, they are still under investigation, and so they are still in prison. They have escaped from the country, but still they are under investigation. And so there are different versions of appliance of the rule of law to this, to Sadir Japarov, who is now in power, and to other people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final question? If not, let me thank Professor Tatkalo for a very interesting presentation and discussion. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you so much.
So we will move to our final presentation. I don't think our fourth presenter has joined us, so I'll move to Professor Peter Howie, who's going to talk to us about Kazakhstan's public works program, a multidimensional evaluation. Thank you, Peter.
I'll share my slides here. I apologize. I may have problems with my computer this morning. So if it doesn't go from slide to slide, let me know, and I'll go back to this, just the non. Oh, okay. So my presentation this morning is on Kazakhstan's Workfare program, and I must admit I probably should not put myself as the first name in the list of names. I don't give my co-authors the benefit of doing a lot of the work on this research. These two were former students of the MPP program. Okay, so in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the Workfare program. And our objectives were to evaluate the effectiveness of Kazakhstan's Workfare program in comparison to Workfare programs in other upper middle income countries. The issue we had with this research is that a lot of Workfare programs have been initiated in developed countries, but there haven't been, and assessed in the developed countries. There haven't been so many developed, implemented, and assessed in middle income countries. Second one is to evaluate the Workfare program design by determining how various components of the cost effectiveness ratio affected the proportion of current benefits to government outlays. Now, a significant part of this research is performing the cost effectiveness analysis. And I'm going to try to reduce as much of that complexity in this presentation as possible.
Sorry, Peter, I'm not sure you're moving your slides, are you? If you are, we can't see it.
Okay, I thought that was going to happen. Okay.
Sorry, Peter, can you explain in 2 words what's a Workfare program to those of us who have no idea what it is?
I will do that in a moment. Okay, just you got ahead of myself. Okay, so these are our objectives again. So can everyone see our objectives now?
We can, yeah.
Okay, I will stay in this form then. Okay, so the third one was to evaluate the implementation of the Workfare program, and specifically look at participant selection, a focus on measurable outcomes, and bureaucratization of the process. So just before talking about what Workfare programs are, we'll just talk a little bit about what's social transfers in Kazakhstan. So in 2012, the government introduced conditionality for targeted social assistance for participants in the form of social contract with conditional cash transfers. And it was engulfed in the Orlu project. And following initial piloting in February 2014 in 3 of the Kazakhstan's oblasts, the pilot was expanded in mid-2015 to select rayons in all oblasts, and it was rolled out nationwide in 2018. In 2012, the country spent approximately 0.18% of its GDP on active labor market policies, of which Workfare programs is one component of it. The average OECD number was 0.25, and Kazakhstan's value increased to 0.24% of GDP in 2019. And just to put that in comparison, OECD average in 2018 was just under 0.5%. So these data indicate that Kazakhstan's expenditure on active labor market programs is fairly low in international standards. Actually, I can stop that one. Okay, so you wanted to know what Workfare programs are. Well, for most researchers agree that Workfare programs' main features include an obligation to work, a focus on temporary employment, participation favoring poor, low-skilled families, production of public goods or services, and the Workfare programs pay less than the current market wage for the same kind of work. So these are the sort of the criteria. And then McCord suggested that Workfare programs should be categorized into 4 distinct groups. The first one is short-term employment Workfare programs that are a direct result of some sort of temporary labor market or living disruption like a flood or cyclone, something like that. The second type of Workfare programs, according to McCord, is government guaranteed program Workfare programs, which are large-scale employment programs that are the response to chronic levels of elevated unemployment. And this is kind of the Kazakh approach to Workfare programs. The third type is labor intensification Workfare programs, which focus on construction of assets while increasing aggregate labor usage. And the fourth category is promotion of employability, which addresses the supply side or the worker side constraints to employment and focuses on promoting workplace experience and skills development among the unemployed. The modern impetus of Workfare programs in low and middle income countries originates from India's Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme, often called MEGS, which was introduced in 1970. Since 2000, Workfare programs have become one of the primary instruments to fight poverty associated with temporary shocks. For example, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in India, Programa de Jefes de Hogar in Argentina, or to create pathways out of chronic poverty by creating links with employment and community services, such as the expanded public works program in South Africa. Now, there's key differences between Workfare programs in developed and developing countries, and it's really important to understand this. And the differences are in developing countries, there's a large informal sector or informal labor market and weaker implementation capacities, which limit the effectiveness of Workfare programs in creating formal employment and increasing wages. So again, what I'm going to do in this presentation is break our analysis into 2 parts. We're going to look at the design component, which we assessed using the cost effectiveness analysis, and the implementation, we used sort of a case study approach. So with the design analysis, specifically the cost effectiveness analysis, we used the empirical work of Martin Ravalian, former economist at the World Bank, who estimated the cost effectiveness ratio for Workfare programs. And this is the decomposition of the sort of the cost effectiveness ratio, which the cost effectiveness ratio is the net benefits to poor workers divided by the amount of government spending on the program. And I'll go through what each one of these components relate to in a moment, but just I want to define the different variables in the formula. So G, again, denotes the amount of government spending. C indicates the amount of private co-financing. So this could be co-financing from donors, such as the World Bank. The World Bank has done some of this in Africa, and other donors. W symbolizes the amount of wage and or benefits received by the program participants. L denotes the amount of wages or benefits leaked to the non-poor program participants. So what happens in these programs is you have poor workers and non-poor workers. The non-poor workers actually get involved, become participants of the program because of incentives from the implementation, and I'll talk about that in a moment. NW represents the amount of wage and or benefits minus the foregone income. So it's NW's net wage increases. And IB donates the amount of indirect benefits to the poor. So indirect benefits would be considered assets that are built or provided to poor neighborhoods because of the Workfare program. So just to go through the different components of the cost effectiveness ratio, first is the budget leverage. So that's the amount, it's the ratio of total spending on the Workfare program, including private co-financing, to total government spending. And in Kazakhstan, in our program, C is equal to 0. W plus L over G plus C is labor intensity, and it's a proportion of the wages and benefits paid to workers to total spending on the Workfare program. So the total spending is the wages and benefits paid to the participants, and total spending is the wages and benefits to participants plus the wages and benefits to the staff running the program plus all other expenses. W over W plus L is the targeting performance, and that's the proportion of wages and benefits paid to the actual poor workers. NW over W is the net wage gain, and that's the share of gross wage benefits after subtracting all costs of participation, including foregone income. And again, the indirect benefits inclusion is the last one. And this is when, for instance, assets are provided to poor neighborhoods. I know I've gone through that very quickly. If there's any questions, please ask them at the end of the presentation. So for the evaluation of the Workfare implementation, we assessed whether and how the participation selection process, bureaucrats' focus on measurable outcomes, and bureaucratization manifested themselves in the implementation of the Workfare program. In the selection process, we assessed the presence and frequency of enrollment of high-skilled, most employable recipients who are most likely to meet agency goals, thereby caseworkers expend the least amount of time and energy to meet the program's statistical success goals. We assessed whether bureaucrats prioritize goals based on actual performance measurements, such as meeting enrollment and hourly working quotas that are developed by the national government. And finally, we assessed the level of bureaucratization by assessing Nur-Sultan's control of the process of management and decision-making, oversight of the recruitment of directors, professionals, and their salary, and third, the administration of data and other logistics. Our data was a series of interviews. We interviewed the director of a city employment center. We had interviews with 4 program managers and 25 program participants. And then we also supplemented this information with statistics and open source data from government and state media publications. And the interview data were collected in field trips over the period of 4 months between October 2019 and January 2020. Just to put some numbers that are important here, again, for the budget leverage, there was no private co-financing, so we set C to be 0. W, which is the wage and benefits, from our interviews with the participants, we estimated that the wage and benefits per month was the average was 146,719 tenge. According to the Minister of Labor and Social Protection, the average target of social assistance in the country was equal to 105 6,000 tenge per participating household. So what we did is, to be objective, we used both analysis and kind of did a sensitivity analysis when we calculated our cost effectiveness ratio. The labor intensity, believe it or not, the interviewees actually reported, some of them, 16% reported a lower income to become eligible to the program. So there was, L was 16, so the actual number of workers that should have been involved in the program was only 84% of our sample. As a result, our leakage to the non-poor is assumed to be 16. Just to put that into context, according to the Minister of Labor and Social Protection, the proportion of households who hid their incomes is estimated at 1/4 of all participating households. So we're using a lower number than the ministry number. The net wage gain, and this is very difficult to calculate. We had to assume, we assumed that the program does not seriously affect the probability of getting a job, as only 16% got employed as part of the labor activation measures. A lot of these 84% already had the job, and the government became a co-provider of some of that salary. This is lower than the officially reported 22.26% in the open budget documents. And for the purposes of this research, we set the probability of getting a job while being a participant in the program as the average of these two values, which is 19.13. And then the average salary in absence of the program among the interviewees was identified at around 75,000 tenge per month. So using all this information, we calculated the cost effectiveness ratios, and we're interested in the cost of transferring 1 tenge to the poor. And for the higher wage, we estimated that it cost just over 2 tenge to provide 1 tenge to the poor. And at the lower wage, it costed about 2.25 tenge to provide 1 tenge to the poor. Now, if we remove the indirect benefits of from our analysis, then the cost of 1 tenge to the poor cost the government just over 6.5 tenge at the higher wage, and just over 9.25 tenge with the lower wage. So to put this into context with the data in the literature, I want to look at Kazakhstan and compare it to Martin Ravallian's work. And Martin Ravallian's middle income country, even though he doesn't say it in his paper, it's actually Argentina. But it's very hard to find an official source for that. So that's why I don't actually I don't discuss it anywhere here. But I'm comparing the middle income country is Argentina, the low income country I believe is India. So what you'll see is that, yes, the cost, if you include the indirect benefits, the cost ratio is fairly decent for Kazakhstan. But if you don't include the indirect benefits, the cost of providing 1 tenge to the poor is considerably higher than in Martin Ravallian's Argentina case. So again, and then what we've done is I've actually gone through the different components of the cost effectiveness ratio and tried to figure out what was going on, and I'll leave that to the conclusions. So for the implementation stage analysis, we found out that the participation selection process was not systematic. Eligibility based on income, which is means tested, was subject to interpretations by the City Employment Center and Means Testing Commission staff. The measurement of informally employed participants or applicants was especially problematic. Not all city employment staff were familiar with the eligibility requirements due to the high staff turnover. and corruption during the selection process was recognized by all interviewed Workfare participants. During the measurable outcomes, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection defines effectiveness as meeting the targeted number of participants and fully utilizing all allocated funds. And there was evidence of local bureaucrats spending as much as possible of their budget, and evidence of moving candidates to less attractive active labor market program to fill quotas. And with respect to bureaucratization, the interviews identified 4 bureaucratic procedures and nationwide standards that acutely affected the implementation. The first one was the eligibility criterion of propiska, and this criterion is that all members of a household must be officially registered in one location. Otherwise, the family member not residing at the location is not included in the calculation. And our interviews indicated that it's often very difficult for family members of participants to prove that they live together, as landlords refuse to register tenants in rental accommodation to avoid paying taxes on their rental businesses. The second is the application process for rural residents is even more involved than urban residents, as the former must obtain official veterinary certificates, which confirms all the household's livestock. So this takes both time to do this, and there are not a lot of census veterinarians that are willing to do this. The third issue that we came across is that the poverty line officially used in the study Workfare program is the nationwide poverty line, even though poverty rates, average salaries, household compositions, and standards of living vary substantially across the regions of Kazakhstan. And the national poverty line and average salaries are considerably higher in our study area than in the nationwide average. And then fourth, the interview with the City Employment Center director revealed that the e-Halik electronic database was not ready for the large number of applicants when the program was scaled up nationwide. And the delay of the database created a substantial wait list for applicants. Sometimes applicants had to wait for up to 6 months. So just to conclude, what were the design flaws that were exposed by the cost effectiveness analysis? There was a relatively large benefits exacerbated by high levels of labor informality contributed to inclusion error and benefit leakage to the non-poor. There was inadequate targeting of workfare programs towards poorer neighborhoods and lower than desirable labor intensity, which means that there was a high amount of the costs of the program were allocated to actually running the program, not providing the salaries to the participants. And the high cost of running the program was most likely due to the expensive means testing of the applicants. The implementation problems, again, this was exposed by the qualitative analysis. There was an overly bureaucratic requirements of official residency and household asset documents, poor staff training because of high turnover, staff not following standardized procedures because of low wages, high turnover, and corruption, and government KPIs which required meeting a targeted number of participants and fully utilizing all funds. That's the end of the presentation, and I'd be more than willing to take any questions that you have. And I apologize, I went through this very quickly.
No, it was good. It was very good. Kai-Hong, please.
Yes, Kai-Hong. I can't hear you, Kai-Hong. Kai-Hong, I cannot hear anything. Colin, can you hear Kai-Hong?
No, none of us can hear Kai-Hong.
Still nothing. No.
Maybe while, if I may, Peter, while Kai-Hong is trying to get some sound, this issue that you raise about trying to target particular populations through means testing versus the cost of that, this is a universal issue that I hear in developed countries for welfare programs, that in order to target individuals, you have to means test them. The means testing is expensive. So was there anything in particular that you could, that came out of your work that you could recommend around that for Kazakhstan?
Yeah, Martin Revalian recommends not to means test and actually lower the wages and benefits. So there's an opportunity cost for the non-poor to get involved in the program. Mm-hmm. And he strongly advises not to means test. He thinks it's completely wrong in the developing countries because of the high level of informal labor.
Good. Yes, Kai-Hong.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Johnny
Beck. Yes, Johnny.
Just across the room, so you can pop over. Okay, I was fascinated with your research on Workfare, and in Kazakhstan, and how you're comparing cost-benefit analysis. I have a few questions since you are more knowledgeable about the local situation. You mentioned that C was 0.
Yes, for our city that we tested, it was 0. So what we did is we went out and selected one city in Kazakhstan. I won't tell you the city because of, obviously there's some sensitive information that came out, as you saw. But in that city, the manager told us, and Open Budget also confirmed, that there was no co-funding.
No, what don't you include into the co-funding the other sources of private financing, like from the family and self-employment?
No. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at the cost effectiveness analysis. It's not cost benefit analysis.
Okay. What about the other part of leakage? You mentioned the corruption part, possibility of corruption, but yes, how do you link it up with your leakage?
Okay, the leakage is very tightly defined as it's money going to participants who are non-poor. So leakage is there. That's it. Leakage does not include targeting. So the expenditures spent by like, I understand there's a cost to if you're going to be using one of these corrupt people employees to get yourself involved, get yourself included as a participant. There's no way we can actually analyze the amount of money that's going from an individual that's a participant to the CEC or means test commission member. And we didn't ask that question because that was creating a higher risk interview than we were allowed to do.
Okay, that's why I'm going to ask you what the findings of your research. The cost benefit ratio seems for Kazakhstan. Well, everything boils down to good governance, of identifying to the means test and so on. So if that is not done well, the leakage factor will affect your final conclusions.
Yeah. The leakage factor. The leakage is the issue of actually more or less. There's two reasons for the leakage. Our interview showed. One is that there's less work that's actually being done if there's no corruption. Ignore the corruption. So assume there's no corruption. There's leakage because, number one, it's less. It's easier for a bureaucrat to process a person who has higher skills. Okay, number one. Number two, the outcome of the program is better if you have higher skilled people involved in it. But the problem is that a lot of the higher skilled people are the people, you know, that are actually benefiting are non-poor. There's a correlation between the high-skilled and the non-poor. And sort of these people are working, the non-poor are actually working two jobs. They're working, you know, the government job, and then they're working in the informal sector also. So there's dual employment.
Okay, all right, good. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No problem.
Any other questions for Professor Howie? Can I just ask a quick question, Peter? Does the government itself evaluate these programs?
It does, but they only evaluate it with respect to money spent and number of participants. There's no you know, comprehensive analysis. Now, this approach that we've done is very quick. It could be done within a week.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously. I would obviously suggest that they hire consultants to do it, because I don't think the participants would provide the data, the information to government officials. You know,
were you able to present these findings to government then?
No, we haven't. We provided it to the manager. Okay, mm-hmm. That's it. But the manager didn't really want to see it, so mm-hmm. They kind of said, you know, according to the manager does not evaluate the program. It's the people in the ministry that evaluate the program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Professor Howie? If not, let me draw the session to its conclusion, and on your behalf, let me thank Professor Lodhi, Professor Tatkalo, and Professor Howie for very interesting presentations and very useful discussions thereafter. So thank you very much indeed. Let's show our appreciation to the presenters. Our next session starts at 12:45 and is on corporate social responsibility and sustainable development in Kazakhstan. So we hope to see you all there fairly soon. Thank you.
Just share the link in the chat box, just in case.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.